Hello. So, three things. First, there will be bugs in this. Second, I still wear masks in my talks, and it just felt weird to take one off for this talk, so it's staying on. And third, this is not actually the talk you're going to get. This is the talk I've often given before about what we have learned from the hellscape from the last few years. But Andy suggested that this audience would like instead to hear something more personal. So this is... It's got a happy ending, okay, kind of. So, all right, so in early 2020, this was me with my child. I was meant to be writing a book about how animals sense the world around them. And I was about halfway through a 10-month book leave, trying very hard to not think about the troubling news of a novel coronavirus that was spreading through China. And then that news became impossible to ignore for all the reasons you know. But for me personally, because 2 years before that, I had written this piece in 2018 about whether the US was ready for a pandemic. And having written this, I felt increasingly anxious about then not writing about the actual brewing pandemic. And my wife, Liz, said, instead of just stewing in your own guilt about not working, why don't you go back to work? And my editor said, why don't you come back to work? So I went back to work. In the first 12 days of doing so, I wrote two 2,000-word features as a kind of warm-up, and then this 5,000-word monster that was written in like a 7-day fever dream in the middle of March. And that sort of set the stage for the next few years. My instinct when I went back to it was to do like smaller takes, like find little pandemic angles that other people weren't covering. And it was my editors who said, we actually don't want you to do that. We want you to take the biggest swing possible. And the nature of that swing became very clear. People were freaking out. I was freaking out. I needed to tell everyone what was going to happen. Journalism is fragmentary. It tends to show people small pieces of big stories one at a time, which can make the big picture impossible to see. And I wanted to show people what that big picture was. I wanted to unite all the pieces together. This was an omnicrisis, something that was uprooting all of our lives, every part of society. To understand it, the piece needed to sort of be about everything. And so it was, How the Pandemic Will End. It was a piece about the near-term future, the middle-term future, and the far-off aftermath, how everything is going to play out to the best of my ability to predict it. It was what one reader described as the journalism of evidence-based imagination. This piece became the second most read in The Atlantic's history, and it set the tone for everything that I would do for the next few months. Most of these pieces were equally long explainers. In some ways, they bucked the trend. They were 3,000 to 8,000 word pieces without central protagonists, and that was by design. The pandemics are collective problems, something I consistently try to emphasize. You can't make them into a hero's journey. It doesn't work. I try to talk to a wide variety of people, not just doctors and virologists and epidemiologists who are sort of treated as these experts of the entire problem. Pandemics are a problem that affects all of society. To understand them, I talked to public health people, sociologists, anthropologists, ethicists, historians, patients. In every single piece, I had a rule for myself that half the people I talked to had to be someone who I'd never talked to before. There was a consistent problem throughout a lot of pandemic reporting where people would keep on going back to the same sources again and again and again and again, which not only narrows the number of perspectives that you get, but also makes you incredibly vulnerable if any one of those people happens to be full of shit. These pieces were all attempts to preempt the zeitgeist, to answer the big questions that people were asking, perhaps even before they realized that they were asking them. Why is this all so confusing? How did it get to this? Why do we keep going round in circles? Why is my experience so different to that of another person who I'm hearing about on the news? These were attempts not to just tell people what is happening, which I think we are decent at as a field, but to help them make sense of it, which is a considerably different task. Sense-making involves synthesis. It involves weaving threads of information together in real time, talking about not just what is happening, but why it is happening, giving the historical context for it, talking about what might happen in the future, that journalism of evidence-based imagination again. I saw the pandemic as this raging rapids, this torrent of information and misinformation in which we were all getting swept away. And my job was to erect a platform in the middle of that so that readers could stand on solid footing and observe the swirling chaos around them without themselves drowning in it. I also saw the work as about expanding our moral imagination, saying that regardless of what has happened and the bad choices we continue to make, we do know how to not suck at this problem. And at any given moment, we have that choice available to us. Whether we fail at pandemics or not is a choice. And we can make better choices all the time, as the organizers of this conference have shown. But at the core of it all was a desire to tell the truth, to not give messages, to not try and reverse engineer some desired behavior and then think about the information that would get people there. It was just, without hectoring, without lecturing, reporting, telling people what is going on, helping them make sense of it, showing my working and letting the work speak for itself. And it often did. Here are just two examples of things that people said to me in which these pieces allow them to open conversations with others in their community, to help them stay safe and to ensure that the people around them were safe. While writing these pieces, I went through a lot of the same things that many other people did during the pandemic. I ran out of toilet paper, got a pandemic puppy. This is Typo. I did a lot of Zoom calls in what I called Corona formal. Normal stuff, right? But as the work caught on, things started getting very not normal, and my life just became strange in ways I wasn't expecting. Firstly, I just got a lot more readers, including people I never really would have thought would engage with the work that I did, people who I might have voted for, or whose recipes I might have cooked, or whose movies I might have watched. My personal favorite were all the comic book writers whose work I've been reading for decades, who suddenly read my work. That was very strange. My inbox went nuts. In the 2 days after How the Pandemic Came out, I got 1,000 emails and set up an out-of-office message that then stayed on until I left my job last year. Many of these were unpleasant, hence the final coda. It turns out that Americans don't really love Asian people talking about collectivism or British people telling them what to do. And I provide both services. But actually, in the main, most of those messages were lovely and gratifying and encouraging. There was just a lot of them. I also got a lot of requests to talk about those pieces on TV and on radio. I am 100% wearing shorts and joggers in all of these. And it just all felt a bit unreal. I joked often that Ed Yong became a character in this season of pandemic, a character who is only loosely based on me and who I occasionally get to write the dialogue for, but is living his own weird life somewhere else. And then this happened, which was nice. So this is one of my best friends, Beck, who thought that this might happen and took a video of themselves watching the ceremony. I love her to bits. Several consequences of winning this prize. First, I forgot to do the New York Times crossword and lost my 536-day streak. So you win some, you lose some, right? I got a hilariously cheap-looking certificate, and I got a very nice title that lives on my book jackets and my bio forevermore. This was, and other prizes were really wonderful, validating things that convinced me that the work was good. I never dreamed that anything like this was possible. But they were also strange. Right? They added to the weirdness of the whole moment for several different reasons. First, this prize goes to one person, and journalism is a team sport. Right? So I couldn't have done any of the work I did without my editor, Sarah Lasco, who made every single piece that much better. I couldn't have done it without all the people at The Atlantic who go into producing their work, copy editors, fact checkers, the art team, the audience team, who gets readers onto these words. I especially couldn't have done any of this without my wife, Liz, who was there through all of it. I think often when men say, I couldn't have done this without my wife, they mean because she did all the physical and emotional labor for many years in our relationship. I want to say that I specifically mean that Liz's curiosity, empathy, compassion, and way of seeing the world influenced the way I thought about my pandemic work. And her intellectual and moral DNA is suffused through all of the writing I did. It was just strange to be writing work that was fundamentally about collectivism and to be honored as an individual. And as we know, we kind of suck at choosing individuals to honor. We adulate blowhards, harassers, bawling man-children. By show of hands, how many of you know terrible people who are inordinately successful in your field? How many of you know amazing people who have gone unnoticed? How many of you know people who made it big and then went off the rails hard? Yeah, okay. We know that success snowballs, so if you do get a smidgen of success, you're more likely to get more. We know that we do not live in a meritocracy. And should be basically impossible to know all of that and then think, well, my awards were totally earned. And also, I won because we all lost. So the high point of my career was for work that I wish had never been necessary and that reflected the suffering that we were all experiencing. 2 weeks after I won the Pulitzer, the Delta variant, the first of many, swept through Missouri and then through the rest of the nation. And the work continued. I had lots to do. In some ways, that status shift made the work harder because, as we've heard repeatedly today, every incentive we have, every system, every algorithm, it's all a machine for converting normal people into power-hungry, attention-starved assholes. One thing I realized during all of this was if I don't try and actively resist that process, I will lose myself to it. So I set some rules, and here they are. First, no arguing with strangers on the internet. I have other things. Corollaries to this, no punching down, no quote tweet dunking, none of that nonsense. I basically only broke this once because fucking Jonathan Chait started mouthing off about trans people, tagged me into his mentions, and can fuck off into the sun. Some people are so beneath you can't help but punch down at them, so the rule is invalid. Relatedly, do not become a pundit. Cultivate readers, not fans. So I only ever did TV and radio interviews on stories that I had reported on. I only tweeted about things that I had reported on. The bit about readers, not fans was about focusing on the quality and the integrity of the work rather than what the work would bring me. No savior complex. So I was far from the only journalist who was doing good work at this time. It's not all on me. Try and uplift the whole community. Acknowledge that community wherever possible, and not just tokenistically. I distributed the entirety of the Pulitzer Prize money to the people who I mentioned earlier, the copy editors, fact checkers, artists, audience people, all the team at The Atlantic who made that work possible. I came into journalism from the sidelines, and I often, when I started out, worked on beats like fun animal behavior that was often deemed unserious by other people within my community. And so I've always had a bit of imposter syndrome around journalism, around writing, around my place in it. And I think when people with imposter syndrome, get status, it's very, very easy to fuck up. Because you don't understand the weight that your words might have on the people around you, because you don't understand the new place you have in the world. And so this was about trying to think about that at all times, even if I didn't feel it, and to use that power well. And that meant doing things like uplifting other people's work, to try to do the opposite of what the star writers normally do, and instead, support the Atlantic's union, and do stuff internally. And it was about telling stories that hadn't been told, and that weren't being told. So very early in my reporting on the pandemic, I started hearing about people who were sick and were not getting better. At the time, the phrase long COVID and long haulers were not part of common understanding. Many of the doctors and clinicians I spoke to didn't know that this was a possibility. But I wrote this piece in early June of 2020 and tried to keep on writing about this topic, about the people who broke the mold of what this disease was meant to be like. There were 7 more long COVID stories. They feel to me still like the most important of the work I did at the time. I tried to treat long haulers as protagonists of their own stories, people with agency rather than passive recipients of medical aid. I tried to draw links to other chronic illnesses like ME. I tried to show what the symptoms are like, how things like brain fog and fatigue have these kind of nebulous colloquial terms that in no way capture the real lived experience of what it is like to have these symptoms, experiences that are so different to the everyday experience of healthy, abled people as to seem unbelievable. Those same symptoms can make it very hard for long haulers to tell their own stories. And so I think journalism can act as a conduit for empathy, putting words to the indescribable and clarifying the unfathomable for people too sick to do it themselves. People who had been sick for years or decades had told me that they had finally seen work in the mainstream press that accurately, compassionately, and fully reflected their lives. And a lot of long haulers said that these pieces helped them find community, to better understand what was happening to them, to get care, and to, perhaps most importantly, feel the relief of recognition at a time where everyone else was telling them that they were making things up, that it was all in their head. These pieces inspired others that fell along similar lines, about healthcare workers who were crashing, immunocompromised people who felt that they couldn't return to normal just as so many other people were trying to do, people who were still stuck in endless cycles of pandemic grief because they lost loved ones to the disease. This genre of pieces was about bearing witness to suffering, which I think is one of the most profound things we can do as people. These pieces taught me a lot. First, they taught me we can actually still change people's minds, like at a time when it felt like everyone was polarizing and hunkering down. Many people told me that this piece about grief completely changed how they thought about how to extend grace to those who were still suffering. It reminded me that the audience for my work does not simply consist of the people who first read the stories. I just always thought about readers in that way, in that one-step model. But of course, that's nonsense. We exist in a society. We live in networks. And so many long haulers use these pieces to open conversations with their employers, their family members, their friends, their loved ones, their colleagues, to say, this is what I'm going through. Here's what you can do to support me. It reminded me that our work cascades through networks. And if done well, it can make those networks stronger rather than fraying them further apart. These pieces reminded me also that even if they don't do that, even if it's just about preaching to the converted, that is crucial work, providing validation, strength, and stability to people who feel gaslit and dismissed and forgotten, can help them feel stronger and surer in their decisions. These pieces made me understand that journalism can be a caretaking profession, even if it is never really thought about in those terms, right? It is often framed in terms of antagonism. Speaking truth to power turns into being hard-nosed and removed from our subject matter, which so easily turns into be an asshole and do whatever you like. This is a viewpoint that I reject. My pillars are empathy, curiosity, and kindness, and much else flows from that. For people who feel lost and alone, we get to say through our work, you are not. For people who feel like society has abandoned them and their lives do not matter, we get to say, actually, they fucking do. We are one of the only professions that can do that through our work, and that can do that at scale, a scale commensurate with many of the crises that we face. But that work was crushing. This is the view from the window of my home office back when I lived in DC. I would stare at this brick light well while listening to the worst days of people's lives for hour after hour and day after day. I had a wife, I had a home, I had a job. I had the opportunity to contribute to something bigger than I was. And all of these privileged conditions did nothing to lessen the fact that the work was hard. I was also just a person dealing with the same fear and anxiety as everyone else. It was really hard to work out what was happening in real time, to make sense of it for me, let alone for anyone else. I felt like being constantly gaslit by literally everyone, from like some rando on Twitter to the President of the United States. The pieces about bearing witness to suffering and absorbing this huge amount of pain and then just stewing on it, holding at it, staring at it, trying to make sense of it, and then channeling it. My therapist, who I found quite late in this process, pointed out that there are many similarities in our work, but only one of us has training. Here are the bugs. These are army ants. Army ants, like many ants, lay down pheromone trails that other workers will then follow. But if those trails accidentally loop back onto themselves, the ants will then march in circles, endless circles, walled in by their own unhelpful instincts until they get exhausted and die. This is the army ant death spiral, and this is exactly what it felt like, watching us go through the same mistakes again and again and again and again. The work never stopped. Many people had ups and downs in the pandemic, reprieves and the lulls between surges. As I understand it, some people got bored. I was never bored. I thought about the pandemic every day, all the time, because I needed to. I wrote this piece about how the pandemic experts are not okay, and a public health person told me how burned out they were, and I remember thinking, yeah, I feel you. That was in June of 2020. At the end of 2020, I knew I was in bad shape and that I needed some time off, so I took 4 months off to finish my book. Perhaps I'm the first author in history to write a book for a mental health break. But this topic is all about joy and wonder, and honestly, like writing half a book in 3.5 months was like going to the spa. This was sort of the vaccine era, right? Like January to April 2021, people were getting their shots, and I kind of expected to come back and for things to be substantially better. And in retrospect, that was naive, and I think to understand why it was naive, I need to do a little bit of history. So, in the mid-19th century, after investigating a typhus outbreak, this chap, Rudolf Virchow, who is now known as the father of pathology, understood very clearly that epidemics were the result of factors like poverty, overcrowding, squalor, unsafe work, poor education, and political inattention. These factors determined which communities were going to get sick and which ones stayed healthy. It's very clear to him, he said famously, medicine is a social science. This model fell away in the early 20th century because of germ theory, the very correct understanding that a lot of long-standing diseases were the result of microbes. But with that understanding came this compelling new vision of health that was steeped in war and imperialism and technocracy. which had easy villains, microbes, which could be subjected through the technological application of research. When this vision came forward, all of that pesky social stuff became deemed as irrelevant. It was more apolitical and objective, notably easier to just look down the microscope at the bug and find a way of annihilating it. That biomedical paradigm influenced how the Western world thought about disease for over a century, and it's why today we still think about preparedness in terms primarily of drugs and vaccines, and rather than non-pharmaceutical interventions like this. The problem is that a vaccine is a product. In tech-obsessed nation that we are, we assume that once we got the product, we would solve the problem. But a vaccine is useless without vaccination, and vaccination requires systems. It requires all of that social stuff, which we've kind of neglected, access to the medical system, time and flexibility to make an appointment, trust in the government and in each other. And part of the problem also is that epidemics and these tech solutions flow in opposite directions. New cures, vaccines, and diagnostics first go to people with power, wealth, education, and connections, who then move on, which explains why health inequities so stubbornly persist across the decades, even as health problems change. This is the so-called theory of fundamental causes, and boy, was it applicable when I returned to work in 2021. Vaccines have become eligible to everyone. The entire media got vaccinated early and said, I am safe, and therefore it is safe. Places like the New York Times and The Atlantic were publishing pieces after piece saying that liberals were panicking and still steeped in pandemic anxiety despite the fact that everything was over. It wasn't over, it still isn't over. But the massive drive to portray it as over made my job that much harder and that much more demoralizing. This sign was something I took in Dulles Airport in 2021. I think it sums it up well. This is just garbled, glitchy public health advice, and the only intelligible word is, please. Everything was just more complex. And the percentage of people who made sense in 2020 but were now full of shit grew every month. But the people who were full of shit in 2020 who now made sense was zero. So the pool of people who I could rely on as a journalist shrank all the time, and the world just fractured further and further. I had people telling me that I was now misleading people into remaining fearful, and also people telling me that I was minimizing the pandemic by not making people fearful enough. And the sheer cognitive dissonance of all of this was crushing. I was reading pieces, including my own publication, about how things were over and no one cares anymore, after listening to someone crying on the phone to me about how their parent had just died of COVID. This is from a piece I wrote about healthcare workers, and it was about burnout, but really it was about moral distress. This line sums it up. Healthcare workers aren't quitting because they can't handle their jobs. They're quitting because they can't handle being unable to do their jobs. And this is how I felt. Like, sure, I could write the pieces I wanted to write, but it felt like I would bust my ass to do one of these only for an equal and opposite piece to emerge, sometimes in my own publication, that kind of neutralized the effect of whatever I was trying to write about. All the things that I was emphasizing, the importance of equity, collectivism over individualism, it felt like they were all falling on deaf ears. I tried to remember words of people like this, like the abolitionist Mariam Kaba, who talks about how hope is a discipline, not this nebulous abstract concept, but a thing that you specifically have to cultivate. Or the global health legend Paul Farmer, who talked about fighting the long defeat. Even if you know that you're going to lose to forces bigger than you are, you fight nonetheless. But there came a point when I just didn't have the energy anymore. This is a quote from a comic book, I think an issue of Excalibur that I read during this time. My mental health was shredded. I was depressed, I was anxious, I was not sleeping, I was just standing in the shower for long periods of time, really bad anhedonia, so just nothing felt joyful or pleasurable. When I was reporting on how other communities deal with this, really 3 themes came up. One was people would double down on duty and mission, and I did that. I did that for the longest time, and I told myself that I couldn't stop because the work was necessary and because I had power, a platform, and the right skills, which were not easy things to give up. The second was find community and strength in that. And this was hard because journalists are meant to maintain a certain tension from the communities they report on. And so while I saw the people I was talking about knitting together with each other, I felt removed from that, perhaps necessarily so. And then the final thing was to stop. And stopping felt like letting everyone down, but it also became necessary. I told myself that I would only stop if I ever felt like I really lost myself, and then at some point I wondered if that had already happened. In October 2022, I took a 6-month sabbatical. I did absolutely nothing. I rested, I did a lot of journaling, I played with my dog, I regained the ability to read, I went almost completely offline. All my life, I had defined myself through productivity, through how much I could produce in quick succession. And this gave me time to work out whether that was what I actually wanted, and to try and internalize the idea that I had worth beyond my work. In April 2023, I went back to work. Not well, I don't think, but certainly much better. I stopped writing big pandemic pieces because it felt like I had already said everything I wanted to say and was just repeating myself. They still had unfinished business. There were 2 long COVID stories I really wanted to write, one about long COVID denial and another about what fatigue really meant. I finished those, and then it just felt like I was finished. That for all the reasons I talked about already, and then also the Atlantic's continuing commitment to publishing, alongside some of the best journalism in the world, poorly argued screeds about trans stuff, race, and much else, that I was done. And in last July, I quit my job. I do recognize the privilege inherent in that decision. There are people in this room who have lost their journalism jobs. I let mine go. In part, I let mine go because I have books and other ways of paying the bills. So I'm not presenting this as a valorous decision, just a necessary one for me. So 1 year later, this is where I am now. I took up birding. I dove deep into it. I've seen 389 species in the US this year. Most of them were lifers. I also took up photography. All of these pictures are mine. This is a black skimmer. This has been extraordinary for my mental health. It has tripled, quadrupled the amount of time I spend outside. It has suffused my life with joy and wonder. The voices in my head, all the anxiety fades away when I'm birding. I focus all my attention on the present. All my senses are crisp and focused. It's more meditative than meditation. I'm working on a 3rd book about life at different scales, the very small, the very big, the very long-lived, the very short-lived. It's a continuation of the themes I touched on in my first 2 books, part 3 of a trilogy. I wanted to focus on a big project instead of tearing myself in many directions. I still don't know how I feel about journalism. I've never felt more strongly about its potential to do good in the world, or that our current institutions are not up to the task of living up to that potential. But for now, I'm done slamming my head against a wall of moral compromises. I'm doing something different. I have a newsletter. I don't feel massively compelled to monetize it either. I want to move away from parasocial relationships and the systems that create them. I'm almost totally offline. I post bird pics on Blue Sky sometimes, and I have a small private Instagram. This thing we do, where we have a random thought and you broadcast it to millions of strangers, I kind of look back on this as the same way I do looking back on like building houses with asbestos. A historical thing that I'm quite happy to have moved past. I do not need to yoke my mental health, it turns out, to the whims of strangers. I don't need to know the takes or the main characters or the discourse. I know where to find lazuli buntings, 30 minutes from my house. I know what house they live in. I know what they sound like. I know where to find golden eagles. I know how to listen to owls in the dark. I know where the migrating warblers are likely to land in a couple of weeks. I pay close attention to the seasons and the tides. I'm investing in my actual community, not just the people I happen to share interests with or exist in the same physical or online spaces in, but my friends, the people I text and talk to on the phone, the found family who come over for dinners every week. I'm trying to share the benefits I get from birding with the long COVID community. I started running monthly birding trips in the Bay Area designed for people with energy-limiting illnesses. They involve minimal walking. They're mostly stationary, places with flat trails and seatings. I provide stools and binoculars. It's called the Spoonbill Club. I'm trying to help the people I care about get outdoors and enjoy each other's company without jeopardizing their health, to give them a chance to form community with each other. And I'm trying to look after myself, to shake off the impact of the last few years and find a more sustainable way to work and to live. I still wrestle with the guilt of all of this. There's a voice in my head all the time that says you should be doing more, you should be helping, you are wasting your skills, your chances, you are not seizing the moment, you will disappear, you will be irrelevant. But I have listened to those instincts for many, many years, and I have achieved every professional accolade that I could have ever dreamed of and more, and it completely broke me. So I'm trying something new, and I'm taking a bit of a leap. Thank you.